Hi, Mary Scifres here for Mary Scifres Ministries to talk with you about 3 tips for sharing the load. I call these the D's of sharing the load. And the first tip is to decide and do the things that are yours to do. Decide it and do it when you know it's yours. Now, if you're like me, sometimes this is a little tricky to figure out. So how do you figure it out? Well, start by prioritizing the things that you love to do, the things that God has gifted you to do, the things that are part of your purpose and your call. Decide and do those things first and foremost. And then prioritize the things that you have to do. Those things in your job description that really can't be done by anyone else except for you. Now, this is tricky because most of us think that everything we do really well, and nobody else does it as well as us. Or even if that's not true, we think, oh, I don't want to share anything from my job description with somebody else. They might think I'm lazy. So go back to asking yourself, do I have to do this? And do I love to do this? Am I gifted to do this? Is this what God is calling me to do? For an example, preachers have to preach the sermon, probably 40 to 50 Sundays a year. Other Sundays we can share it, but most Sundays it's one of our highest priorities. And yet so often it becomes the last minute thing we do right before the recording team comes in, or if we're preaching live Saturday night at 9 o'clock, we're putting the finishing touches on. What if we decided and did our preaching plans earlier in the week? Because it's a high priority if you're called to preach. Now, preaching is pretty clear for preachers, but most of us don't have that much clarity about the many tasks on our list and even the many tasks in our job descriptions. And so then I invite you to ask another question that helps. Is this my ministry or my work alone? Or is this something that belongs to a larger group, to my committee, to my church, to my team? Which brings me to my second D of sharing the load. That is to delegate those things that are not yours to do. Delegate those things that are meant to be shared. Delegate things that are not in your wheelhouse. First and foremost, it's no gift to anybody if you're trying to take on a task that you're not gifted at. Find someone to help you with that task or even take it on, because it's probably their gift and their purpose to take on that task. And delegate those ministries or tasks that actually belong to someone else. I once had a church administrator who was constantly called by committee chairs to ask her to do their work. And she wondered which was their work and which was hers. She said, "How do I know, Pastor Mary?" And I said, "Well, why don't you ask this question of yourself every time you get called to take on a task? Ask yourself, to whom does this task belong? Or in church, think, whose ministry is this? If it's a Christian ed task, it probably belongs to the Christian ed committee or the Christian ed director. But if it's an administrative task, it probably belongs to the administrative assistant or the executive assistant." And then finally, I suggest you defer those things that don't matter. I know this is really hard for us because we want to do it all. We want to be all things to all people. But if they aren't the highest priority right now, see if you can't defer them. Now, I'm sorry to say that doesn't mean necessary paperwork. You're probably still going to have to do the paperwork you hate. But a lot of things on our task list really don't have to be done. You don't have to answer every survey. I once had a pastoral supervisor who said to me, "Mary, if you have to handle a piece of paper a second time, you haven't done your job, or it's a piece of paper you shouldn't be handling." I keep that in mind before I jump onto yet another webinar or think that, I've got to go to every single pastoral call every single month. Not everything has to be done in the immediate moment. And honestly, not every meeting has to be attended. Not every webinar has to be signed up for. You can read minutes later. You can send a quick email instead of a newsletter one week. You could even make the newsletter monthly or quarterly instead of weekly. Of course, down the road, you can attend to those lower priority tasks. And there may come a time down the road when a lower priority task becomes a high priority, and then you move it to the decide and do category. But if it doesn't ever really matter, you might defer it indefinitely, and that's okay. By delegating, you share the load so that others can participate fully in the work and ministry that you share together, finding and living their own purposes and passions. By deferring, you make room for higher priorities to rise up and important tasks to be fulfilled. And by deciding and doing, you get to live your priorities, God's purpose, and the passion that the Spirit has placed in your life. So decide and do it today, or delegate, or defer it for another day. Share the load so that you can enjoy the load that you are called to bear. I'm Mary Scifres for Mary Scifres Ministries. If this seems really challenging for you, call us. That's what coaching and consulting is all about, and we would be happy to be of help.